The evolution of the Irish Knight between 1028 to 1603, from the early tribal warriors of Ireland to the Gaelicised knights resisting English conquest, the evolution of the Irish Knight, or Ridire as it was in Irish, is an interesting one. Let's journey through time and uncover the fascinating history of the Ridire from 1028 to 1603. Before the Irish Reform in 1028, after the Battle of Clontarf in 1014, the concept of the mounted knight or Ridire did not yet exist. However, the warriors before 1014 laid the foundation of Ireland's martial traditions. Before knights, we had Viking ships that arrived in Ireland. Battles between the Irish and the Norse warriors and Viking urban centres like Dublin brought in challenges and opportunities into Ireland. Viking raiders and settlers introduced a much more conservative style of warfare rather than just cattle raiding. The Irish were already aware of conservative fighting overseas, going all the way back to 1410 and the fall of the Roman Empire, when the Irish would move in to occupy places in both Scotland and Wales, pushing back against the Romans and the Pictish tribes, but were not committed to fighting conventional fighting in Ireland until the arrival of the Vikings. This began the influence of Irish warrior elites in Ireland. While Ridire as a mounted knight had not yet emerged, Irish chieftains started to incorporate mounted combat for mobility and leadership in response to conventional style of fighting rather than just cattle raiding. This period also saw the rise of the Ustamen, Irish Vikings, a hybrid of cultures that bonded Irish and Viking traditions. Urban centres like Dublin and Waterford became hubs of trade, including the encouragement of weapons and armour into the realm of Ireland. In 1028, Sigtrygg Silkbeard, the Hiberno-Scandinavian king of Dublin, undertook a pilgrimage to Rome. This marked a profound turning point in Ireland's religious and cultural history. Sigtrygg's pilgrimage was not just a personal journey of faith, but a political statement that aligned Ireland more closer to the continental Europe. By adopting reforms that integrated Irish Christianity into the wider Roman Catholic Church, Sigtrygg helped steer Ireland from the early medieval era into the High Middle Ages. These reforms had sweeping consequences for the men and women of Ireland. The Church brought new diocese system and new canon rules, replacing the older monastic networks. Closer relationship between the Irish elites and the broader European world, including martial tradition. As Ireland became more entwined, the concept of chivalry and defined piety, martial skills and services became a shape of the evolving identity of the Ridire, the Irish Knight. By the time we get to 1096, Pope Urban II called for a crusade. Obviously, the call for more religious fanatics reached the shores of Ireland. This was the period of King Turlough Ibrahim and Murtagh Ibrahim, who was unifying the Ireland, and so many nobles that weren't fitting into the unification of Ireland were given the hint to go off and crusade, often through alliances with the Normans and the Norwegians. Many Gaelic and Ustamen who didn't fit into a modern society would easily jump on to these crusades and march off to the Holy Lands. Those who joined the crusades returned with a new perspective, blending their native warrior traditions with the ideas of Christian knighthood. This fusion heavily influenced for what it was to be a Ridire, an Irish knight. No longer just a local champion, but a defender of the faith. As we can see in the 12th century, with the vision of Tundal, which highlights the shaping of the Irish knights in Ireland and their interpretation of the world. The vision of Tundal is a 12th century Irish text detailing the knight's journey through the afterlife. This was a cornerstone of medieval European literature, written in 1249 by an Irish monk in Germany. The tale reflects the spiritual understanding of an Irish knight in this era, from around Cashel to Cork. Tundal, a knight, confronts the visions of hell, underscoring the importance of divine judgment. The narrator tells us of the Irish knight class in Ireland in the 12th century before the coming of the Normans. The vision of Tundal likely inspired many knights and questioned their actions in the battlefield, questioning their fate and their identity as both a martial art and their spiritual duty. The evolution of the knight in the 11th and 12th century is quite an interesting one, and it was mostly of Viking influence, Gaelic romance. However, the biggest weakness to the Ridire in the 11th and 12th century is the lack of cavalry, much more tougher and harder horses and cavalry strikes that we would see with the coming of the Normans to Ireland. In the later 12th century, the Normans would obviously take a massive change with the arrival of the Normans in Ireland. The arrival of the Normans and the rise of the Ridire. The Norman invasion of Ireland in 1169 marked a turning point in Irish warfare and society. The arrival of the heavily armoured mounted Norman knight brought with them a feudal system that imposed the chivalric ways, the centre of rule of the knight in military and social societies. For the Gaelic Irish, these knights became the symbol of what the term Ridire meant in the 12th century, which was adopted into the Gaelic world for mounted warriors, but not applied specifically to the Normans alone. Despite the initial shock of the Norman invasion, the Gaelic Irish were far from being passive and would adopt to the new military order. While the Normans brought advanced technology such as the heavy cavalry charge and the construction of stone castles, such as the one in Trim, the Gaelic Irish quickly adapted to these invaders into their realm. One significant way the Gaelic elite integrated the Normans was through marriage. By marrying their daughters to Norman knights, Irish chieftains formed a powerful alliance that blended the Gaelic and Norman cultures. In other cases, Norman knights were hired as mercenaries. Because most Normans were competing for land in the Isle of Ireland, and those who didn't fit into the economics and finances that were going on would often marry into Gaelic lords and find opportunities elsewhere from Dublin and Waterford. This created the opportunity for many Gaelic to introduce these unwanted Norman knights into Irish society. The Gaelicised Ridire, 1350 to 1500s. By the late medieval period, the Norman and Gaelic worlds in Ireland had merged in many ways, creating a unique hybrid of cultures. This fusion gave rise to the Gaelicised Ridire, a figure who combined martial traditions with both the Gaelic Ireland and the Anglo-Irish cavalry. These knights were commanding a mixed armies that included kerns, light infantry. They were adapted into the warfare of 14th and 15th century Ireland, where the galloglass and the Ridire would have still held the line, as mounted Ridire would have been the wrecking balls on the battlefield. The Gaelicised Ridire served as both warriors and lords. Their identities shaped the evolving landscape of warfare in Ireland and the broader European conflicts that influenced it. Of course, the arms and armour and the evolution from the 100 Years' War to the Wars of the Roses played a huge impact on Ireland. The 100 Years' War between England and France brought a significant advancement in arms and armour, many of which made their way to Ireland through Anglo-Irish knights and mercenaries. This would bring in the development of full-plate armour into Ireland. This became increasingly common, providing superior protection against the longbows and crossbows that dominated European battlefields. Anglo-Irish knights began to adopt the styles of both conventional warfare in France, and also adapted their armour to fight in Ireland. The longsword was becoming popular as a visual identity on the battlefield, while polearms such as halberds and bills became critically important in the development of warfare in Ireland. Of course, even the helmets, like the bassinet with a visor, replaced earlier great helms, offering better mobility while maintaining protection on the battlefield. These advancements, however, were adopted again for Irish warfare on the rugged terrain where ambushes were constant and a part of tactics of Irish warfare, meant that heavy plate armour was impractical in many campaigns within Ireland. As a result, the Anglo-Irish knights often wore lighter versions of plate armour or combined it with chainmail for greater mobility and protection during a skirmish with Anglo-Irish and Gaelic forces. The transition into the Wars of the Roses between 1455 and 1487, a series of English wars, would further influence the evolution going into Ireland, as both the Fitzgeralds and the Butlers would fight over control of the Irish Parliament. Many Anglo-Irish lords were drawn into this conflict, allying either with the Fitzgeralds or Butlers, who had further connections to the Yorkists and Lancastrians in England. This exposure and connection into English warfare brought continuous evolution into Ireland. The tactics overseas in England would see more heavily armoured cavalry, where infantry equipped with polearms played more of a critical role than ever. In Ireland, these advancements integrated into the existing hybrid warfare of the Anglo-Irish, whose equipment adapted to more local conflicts, balancing heavily English armour for practical use in Ireland. The Gaelicised Ridire, the Anglo-Irish, and the changing role of the knight. As the 100 Years' War ended and the Wars of the Roses unfolded, the role of the knight in Ireland continued to evolve. The Gaelicised Ridire became a symbol of the blending of cultures, drawing in the best elements of the Gaelic and Anglo-Irish martial traditions. However, coming to the end of the 15th century, we start to see the decline of the knight on the battlefield. The idea of chivalry began to wane during this period, and the rise of professional armies and mercenaries demolished the role of the knight on the battlefield. However, in Ireland, the Ridire retained their status as military leaders and local lords, ensuring their continued evolution going into the 16th century. In areas like the Pale, closer to English control, knights kept closer to the English interpretation of what it was to be a knight, and in Gaelic controlled areas, the Ridire embraced more Gaelic traditions and customs. Going into the 16th century, the Tudor Conquest of Ireland and the decline of the Ridire, one could imagine marching soldiers in formation, cannons firing, blasting at walls, and the chaos of battles like the Battle of Kinsale. The 16th century marked a twilight for the Ridire, as the Tudor Conquest of Ireland introduced new forms of warfare that replaced the old medieval ways on the battlefield. The English crown deployed professional armies equipped with firearms, cannons, and disciplined pike formation, effectively sidelining the heavily armoured Gaelic knights. Gunpowder reduced the traditional old ways, plate armour, lances, swords, ineffective against more modern Gaelic and English armies. Yet the Ridire did not completely fade away yet. Figures like Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone, and Red Hugh O'Donnell emerged as figures of what a Gaelic knight would have looked like on the 16th century. Despite effective pressure on Irish autonomy, these leaders combined traditional Gaelic tactics such as ambushes and swift cavalry raids with modern tactics introduced by their Spanish allies. The war culminated with the Battle of Kinsale. However, by 1603, the Ridire hadn't a place in the modern battlefield anymore. with the end of the 9 Years' War in 1603 would be the last time that we would see the knight in Ireland. As with the flight of the Earls, the idea of a Gaelic knight had come to an end. However, just like the flight of the Earls had brought an end to Gaelic Ireland, so too did the Gaelic knight finally leave Ireland. From Sigtrygg Silkbeard's pilgrimage to Rome, to the Crusades, to the Norman cavalry charges, to them fighting alongside the kerns and the galloglass, to the final stand in Kinsale, the evolution of the Irish knight, the Ridire, is very exciting for me to talk about. The story of the Irish knight is one of transition and resistance. The Ridire was more than just a warrior. He was a leader, a symbol of cultural pride, a reflection of Ireland's history. Though the knight as a military figure had vanished after the Tudor Conquest, his legacy endures in the myths and the stories of Ireland. Thank you for joining me today on Irish medieval history. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. Of course, take a look at my Patreon. Right now I have classes going on every Sunday night, so definitely check at the times and see if you can jump on for a few classes during the month. Anyway guys, thanks very much and slán go, yeah.